All right, another mock draft Monday for Ryan Wilson, and he has a big change at the top. Aidan Hutchinson was the number 1 overall pick for several weeks until now. Evan Neal, who was number 6 last week, is up to number 1, the offensive tackle out of Alabama, number 1 to the Jags. Kayvon Thibodeau down at 5 to the Giants, and Matt Corrall, despite that injury, an injury that looks like is not too severe that he suffered in the bowl game, he goes number 6 to the Carolina Panthers, the only quarterback in the top 10. Let's get Ryan Wilson in here, joined by Brady Quinn and Danny Cannell as well. Ryan, Evan Neal, I mean, he was great in that game. How much did that performance impact what you had to do with him this week?
Sadly, Chris, it really didn't, and it feels like overreaction Monday based on the semifinal games, but that's actually not what happened. I can partly blame our guy Pete Prisco for this. He was talking about this as if you're the Jaguars and they look to be stuck with the number 1 pick, would you take another edge rusher? We've talked about this every Monday. How many edge rushers do you need? I love Aidan Hutchinson. He's still my number 1. He didn't play great over the weekend. I don't think that changes anything. You mentioned Evan Neal and the way he balled out. I'm sure that gets people's attention. But if you're the Jaguars and you desperately need to protect Trevor Lawrence, do you consider taking an offensive lineman here? I like Ike Ekwonu from NC State slightly better than Evan Neal, but your mileage may vary, and it could be the case that Neal ends up going first. And if you're the Jaguars, and we've talked about this before, I don't know if there's a situation where you trade down from the number 1 pick because of the quarterback situation in this draft class. Maybe the Jaguars try to fix the offensive line, reach for Evan Neal, if you want to call it that. He's a top 5 guy in my mind. He goes number 1 overall. Teams reach for quarterbacks all the time and miss, I would say 65% of those times. Get an offensive lineman, help Trevor Lawrence, get some offensive minds in there when you reset the coaching staff, and see what you can do next year, because it's been incredibly difficult to watch Trevor Lawrence struggle this year after all the success he had at Clemson and in high school before that.
I love this. I mean, I love Ryan. You mixed it up a little bit. We got a different player in there. And look, maybe it was brought on by the fact that Neal played great and Aidan Hutchinson didn't. Jamari Sawyer kind of had his way when he wanted to with Aidan Hutchinson. You can really credit the entire Georgia offensive line working against Michigan. But the bottom line is it's time to start talking about what you can do to help get Trevor Lawrence playing to the number 1 overall prospect I think we all believe he can be. And getting him the best offensive lineman in this class makes a lot of sense. I think Evan Neal's got a ton of upside, as you can see from the tape. He's played right tackle. He's played left tackle. You'll see a bunch of different tape, too, of him doing different box jumps and the splits and all that stuff that comes along with it. The reality is he's a plug-and-play tackle on either side of the offensive line that should improve the protection and should help with some of the run blocking, too, for a team that desperately needs a big man like him on that group up front. So I love this. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially if the Jacksonville Jaguars can't trade out of that pick, which the reality is they're probably going to be stuck picking number 1 overall. The biggest question becomes, who's the head coach and how is he going to factor into that selection when it comes time to make it?
No doubt. And it's definitely going to impact. So you want to see the vision of what your team identity is going to be. Are you going to, try to run the football? Are you going to try to pat? Like, what type of offense are you going to run? So many questions. But I know it's not sexy. It's not what the fan base always loves. I was I was covering Dolphins pregame when they drafted Jake Long with the number 1 overall pick. And people lost their mind, like, oh, this is boring. You got to make sure it's the right one. And Evan Neal does look like one of those ones that he's versatile, as you mentioned. He's athletic. He can play across the line. I do think it's interesting, Ryan, because you said he's still Aidan Hutchinson, still your number 1, and he dropped to number 2. I was really curious to see what you would do with him, because I do wonder if that game in the Orange Bowl against the Georgia defense, if that does impact his draft stock negatively. And we've had a lot of conversations about Kayvon Thibodeau or Aidan Hutchinson, which one's the top edge rusher in the class, and what impact that does have. Like, there's recency bias in everything. And if coaches are going to go throw in tape, they're probably going to throw in your best opponent, which, find it for Kayvon Thibodeau. It's hard. He didn't have to face a team like Georgia. So that's a challenge in finding it. But you saw what Aidan Hutchinson looked like against the most similar thing he's going to have to face on Sundays, and it wasn't great. So I do think that's going to be fascinating, is what impact that game specifically had on Aidan Hutchinson's draft stock.
Yeah, Ryan, what's your take on that and how that is going to be the lasting impression, at least on the field in game, for Aidan Hutchinson leading up to the draft?
Yeah, I'm smirking, Chris, because Danny makes a good point. And you're like, okay, Aidan Hutchinson, you came back to win the title. Maybe you should have set up the bowl game. Not really. But what if they had played Ohio State in that semifinal where he absolutely dominated? Then we're having a different conversation had they played Georgia earlier in the year. And Danny's exactly right about the recency bias. And I think you have to look at his overall body of work, Aidan Hutchinson, and how... Here's the other thing. Great players have off days. We couldn't talk enough last year about how well Rashawn Slater played against Chase Young, the Northwestern Ohio State matchup. No one dinged Chase Young for it. They actually gave credit to Rashawn Slater, and maybe that's what you're going to do with Sawyer, as Brady noted earlier. But it is something you have to take a step back and refocus and think about how good is Aidan Hutchinson, and have we built him up to be more than he is? He's had a fantastic year, no doubt about it. Maybe he's not the end-all, be-all, but he's still, in my mind, the number one player in this draft class, despite an average to subpar performance over the weekend.
Yeah, we didn't get the chance to see Kayvon Thibodeau play versus Ohio State. We did get to see Aidan Hutchinson, so we know how that worked out, where he was dominant in that game. Not so much in the semifinal, and you're right, Ryan. Everyone's entitled to have a bad game here or there. It just happens to be the most recent game, unfortunately, for Aidan Hutchinson. I think the big question you're going to hear as we get closer to the draft is what's his upside? You know, we talk about that a lot, I think, for quarterbacks and other players, but in this case, for an edge rusher, he's got another guy, David Ojabo, that when I talk to scouts, people kind of say, we actually think Ojabo might have more upside. He's a little bit bendier, a little bit more explosive. And even though you love everything about Aidan Hutchinson's tape and everything you're going to see as far as his technicianing, his work ethic, all that, there might be a ceiling. And you might be looking at other guys like a Kayvon Thibodeau or a David Ojabo and say, we feel like they've got a little more upside to them. So that's going to be a question that I think gets asked quite often. But if Detroit's sitting there at number 2 overall, and they're staring Aidan Hutchinson, a player from Michigan, dead and square in the face, it would be incredibly hard for them to pass up on that opportunity to keep him in the state of Michigan, keep him, obviously Ann Arbor's close to Detroit, and not go with a guy like that to help improve that defense.
So Hutchinson, number 2. Our first quarterback doesn't come until number 6, and that's Matt Corrall. And most of us were holding our collective breath as he left that game. And it looked like it could be a significant injury. Ryan, what were the thoughts going through your head as somebody who puts together a mock draft each and every week? Luckily, the injury does not appear to be serious at all, and Matt Corral is going to be okay. And you do have him going number 6. Who do you have him going to? The Carolina Panthers at number 6.
Yeah, my first thought was, oh, sweet Jesus, let Matt Corral be okay, because, you guys just talked in the previous segment about the transfer portal and how that's sort of taken over college football. It wasn't that long ago, back in 2017, where we were having conversations about, oh, my gosh, I can't believe Leonard Fournette and Christian McCaffrey are opting out of second-tier bowl games. So that was a huge talking point. And, Chris, I actually went back and looked. January 1st, 1996, old Danny Cannell played in his final bowl game, the Orange Bowl, and dominated 290 yards, 4 touchdowns. Of course, Brady Quinn played in his final bowl game as a senior, the Sugar Bowl against LSU. I won't mention the score there, but Brady did have 2 touchdowns. But I would imagine neither of those guys ever thought about opting out and sitting out to improve their draft stock or to make sure they don't get hurt. So I give Matt Corral a lot of credit for being tough. But no one, and you talk to teams, and they've changed their opinion over the last 5, 6, 7 years, no one is going to ding him for sitting out had he chosen to do so. Kenny Pickett did it. Everyone still loves Kenny Pickett. I applaud Matt Corral's toughness. I'm glad he's okay. If he ends up going to the Panthers, he better keep his fingers crossed they draft and sign only offensive linemen in free agency, because that will be a tough sledding next year if he has to face the same sort of situation that we see Cam Newton and Sam Darnold currently having to face in Carolina.
I mean, look, I tore my PCL in that bowl game the first quarter. I remember we had a double screen planted out, and I tried to actually escape from it. And at the time, I got up, my knee felt loose. My first thought was, oh, crap. And then I went over the sidelines. I was talking to the trainer about it. And that time, they're like, we'll just check it out at halftime, but let's just put a Don joint brace on it and see if you can move around and play. So, I mean, look, all those thoughts start rushing through your head thinking, dear God, did I just tear my ACL? Did I get hurt? What does that mean for my future? Clearly, the way that game went, or was going, at least at that point, it wasn't going well, but that started to be the furthest thing from my mind. So I get it. But the reality of the situation is it's a brotherhood. I went in, with a group of guys who we had a goal of trying to win a national championship. It didn't work out for us, but I sweat, I bled. We all sat there and worked through a lot of transition and change there from what the coach went to play for to another coach. There's a lot that goes into that decision. Now I'm going to try to finish out with those guys that I came in with. So that to me was more important than worrying about potentially getting injury, because you can worry about that all the time with the game of football. And there's an example of a guy like Tua Tagovailoa who did get hurt his final year at Alabama. Didn't really change his draft stock as far as where he ended up getting drafted. This isn't going to hurt Matt Corrall either.
Yeah, I mean, we're 2022 with medical advancements. There aren't many injuries, especially for a quarterback, that are just going to plummet you in the draft and cost you millions. Twitter almost broke over what appears to be a sprained ankle. Like, people were losing their minds, and that was kind of annoying because everybody has their takes on what you should do, whether you should opt out or not. I still believe that coaches and Brady's thoughts, what Brady was just expressing there, was almost exactly what Matt Corral said before that game. He's like, hey, these are the guys that helped me get in this position to even be discussed as a first-round pick. Why would I leave them behind and not help them finish a season? Which I do think is a mindset that is really, really attractive to NFL scouts and GMs and evaluators. I think they look at that and they'd be like, man, we're always looking at intangibles. Coaches are trying to find out who really loves the game of football, who wants to play just because they want to be great, not because they want to make a lot of money. And I think Matt Corral gave you a little glimpse of that. And thankfully, we're sitting here still talking about him, and it appears that it won't impact his draft stock. The other thing I was kind of worried about was, if it was more significant, kept him out more, would people say, oh, this dropped him to the late first round, which is where, like, we've done this exercise and he's been all over the first round. And I think it's natural because this is the tendency we see. Players move higher and higher, but he could still go in the 20s. He could still, we don't know where he's going to go. I just hope it's clear cut that the injury that he sustained is not going to impact that draft stock. If teams like him, they're going to take him where they were before or after that game.
Now, Ryan's had him in the top 10 quite a few times in his mock draft. He's been his number 1 overall quarterback going into this draft class, which is light on top shelf quarterbacks, or so it appears at this time. Fellas, thank you so much. You can check out the whole mock draft from Ryan Wilson, the whole first round anyway, on CBSSports.com. You can hear Ryan, Danny, Brady, and many others on the Pick Six podcast, hosted by Will Brinson, your daily NFL fix. Download and follow.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.